Now, speaking of horrible, but somewhat expected, it's Boris Johnson. The ChatGPT. I love AI, man. I didn't know. Every time someone said that, it sounded like schizo rambling noises to me until I saw the video clip where Boris Johnson actually talks like that. He actually says it as, I love AI. I love ChatGPT. It's almost exactly like that. I don't know why he did it like that, but it is funny. Anyway, Boris Johnson says falling birth rates aren't a disaster. They're the best bit of global news in a long time. I disagree, Boris. The thing is, if we were just talking about an equal fall among all peoples of the world, and there was no mass immigration into the West, then this would be a neutral statement. It would be not necessarily a good indicator, as he's saying it is, but not necessarily too bad either. The problem is, the birth rate is falling much more for whites than it is for everyone else, although it's falling for everyone. And all of everyone else is being imported into white countries as if to replace that birth rate. Now that to me looks like fucking sabotage. And so to say it's a good thing, Boris, really betrays that you never really were our guy, as many people realized. Wear the bee suit head as a hat with the rest just hanging down the back. I did think about that initially, but you wouldn't be able to see it. You'd be able to see just like the chin on top of my head. It wouldn't stay there very well. And obviously I've got a different hat on now after all, so. You did indeed, Phil. Boris says, I've just returned from the Tuscan Hills. Well, I mean, you can sort of see where the perspective he's coming at this from. He doesn't care. It's not his problem. Where the bells are tolling for a far more funerals than weddings, he says. A few months back, I was in Tokyo, as Aiden would say, where the kindergarten playgrounds were eerily deserted. It's in Japan as well. Even though Japan hasn't been doing the mass import, I mean, that's the part they got right, but they still have lower birth rates. Across the European continent, he says, from Portugal to the Balkans, bus routes are being cancelled as waves of elderly customers take their last subsidised Freedom Pass to the sky. That's a morbid way of putting it, Boris. Why do all politicians think along the lines of the faster the old people die, the better for us? I mean, technically there's some truth to it, unfortunately. In China, the population is falling so fast that there are now miles of virtually uninhabited high-rise blocks. That is not why there are miles of uninhabited high-rise blocks, Boris. That is not the reason. And I'm surprised I know that, but he doesn't. Like, that might also be true. I don't know. Maybe it's both. But the reason for that is probably the biggest bubble in human history, which is the Chinese construction industry, where they build buildings in fucking practically deserts, in uninhabitable areas that no one will ever... They build mansions in the middle of deserts, in formulaic blocks, mansion after mansion after mansion, that no one will ever live in. They're not furnished, but they're mansions. And people buy them purely as a status symbol. And do you know what the funniest part is? They're not cheap. They're more expensive than real mansions. It's just part of Chinese culture for some reason. And I think it's become part of Chinese culture because it boosts that bubble. Because if it bursts, it could be the end of the Chinese economy. That's why there's uninhabited high-rise blocks, Boris. It's a scam. It's a massive national scam, which is the only thing supporting their fake economy. Now, maybe it's also true that previously inhabited high-rise blocks are uninhabited, but if it's not also that, Boris, if it's just what I said, then you are so fucking wrong. All of the economy is a scam. A lot of it is, JK. Yeah, a lot of it is virtual or expectant, and a lot of that expectation is misplaced. But in China, it certainly is. It's less so in the West, even though it's very bad in the West as well. They think value is stored in property. Well, only if the property is actually useful. Value is stored in things that have value and that continue to exist, that will continue to be useful and don't reduce in value. Houses are a good way of doing it. But houses that no one will ever live in, that's just a bubble. You're only doing it because you think it has value, but if it does, it's like the .com thing. People thought it would have more value than it did, so it became a bubble. And then finally it burst because when people realized it doesn't have value anymore. So everyone had spent too much. Same thing is happening with AI. I think it's less so with AI because AI does have inherent value, but less than is being invested into it, for sure. Not zero. Like the dot-coms have very little value compared to what people assumed. And Chinese houses, I mean, that's almost zero. Who's going to live in an unfurnished desert mansion in the middle of like 50 other block-by-block mansions, nowhere near any amenities or roads, with no water lines or electricity? Who's ever going to live there? It's not valuable. It's just perceived as valuable, which means it's a bubble. I'm not an economist, but I'm saying this with confidence because I think I'm exactly right. It seems obvious. Please tell me if I'm wrong, chat. He does know it's Australia. I could forgive ignorance, but this is malice. It very well might be from Boris. He should know it. He should know it if he doesn't. But as I say, maybe this is also true, that there are previously inhabited urban high-rise blocks that are now struggling to find inhabitants. But I suspect not. I suspect he's just wrong. Adding on to what I said, he says, it's because the economy relies on government projects that circle jerk debt to each other and creates fake money that allows them to take out loans internationally with the real estate held as collateral. Yeah, if the value of the real estate market internally is inflated and no one externally, well, they may know, but they don't need to care because as long as the value internally is held high, it could be used as collateral for debts internationally, but it's fake. They have faked the value of these things. I guess all you need to do is make your own people believe it's valuable to a large enough degree that you can. I mean, at that point, the debts are backed on the cultural practice of buying this shit. Because it's not actually valuable, which means it only holds as long as people believe it is, but so far they seem to continue to believe it is because it's a propagandistic command economy. That's a crazy system, but it seems to be working for them. Built for families that never arrived. Yeah, Boris, that's delusional. They say Boris says, in some provinces of India, the birth rate is so low by historic standards that schools are reporting zero intake. That might be the same sort of bubble economy thing. I don't know. I wonder why that could be. I doubt it's because of what you're saying it is, Boris, but it might be. Yeah, because they're in the West. Yeah, maybe. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, why educate your child if you can just scam them into the US? Because the education is just so shit. I mean, Boris, is this part of a trend, or are you just observing that no one wants to go to school in the third world? Because that wouldn't indicate low birth rates. He says, even in sub-Saharan Africa, where the fertility rate overall is still very high, 4.3 babies per mother, that number, and how many of those do you think are, well, whatever. That number has slumped from 6 or 7 a couple of decades ago and continues to fall. Why would it be so high there, Boris, and so low in the West? He says, that's for the UK. And, how can you gel the fact that the birth rate is so high there with the fact that so many Africans are starving, supposedly? I mean, they are, but this is why. Because their fertility rate doesn't slow down as they're starving. They just starve more. Which is why charity is debatably advisable. Yeah, stop feeding the Africans. Unfortunately, the more you feed them, the more suffering there is because the more of them there are. If you don't feed them at all, then yeah, they will starve and you will feel bad, but there will be far less starvation overall because there are less of them. As much as that is horrible either way, if you can figure out a way to pull them out of poverty without just giving them shit, then go for it. But no one's been able to so far, and there have been many attempts. Many attempts to colonization would be the best possible choice. But even that is fraught with problems because they're not very good at anything. We saw that documentary where the Chinese tried to get a road built there. Just the number of things that went wrong for no good goddamn reason. It's all so tiresome, as they say. Yeah, you could instead give charity to me rather than to Africans. At any of the links, tip.oozlu.net or fund.oozlu.net, and you could instead feed a poor wizard. As of 2019, there's a total of 600,000 villages, up from the 20,000 more in 2011 census of India. So there are more villages, supposedly. Shreya says the Chinese economy isn't a make-believe in internal culture thing. The government and its fake corporations know exactly what they're doing. Oh, I know. as a scam on other nations. It began in the late 80s and early 90s when they were bailed out by the US and converted to a semi-capitalist system, outright predatory national policy. I know. It's not accidental. It is very much deliberate, I know. The best way to manage Africa is a hands-off approach. The Belgian one, I mean. It may be the best idea, yeah. Just leave them the fuck alone. But the problem is, many Westerners, are so compassionate that that won't be possible. And so I feel like the only practical solution is some sort of humane colonization. As much as that, I mean, you've got to make it profitable. But there are natural resources there. You may be able to make it profitable whilst still dealing with the locals, hiring any that are hireable. But you will need to extract a lot of profit for that to be worth it. And that will get on people's nerves as well, the compassionate kind. They'll assume that you're raping the land. But that is the only thing you could do to improve the lives of the people living there, because they won't do it for themselves. And it will take a lot of selection pressure. It will take a lot of, no, you can't do this job because you are literally too incompetent. We're going to have to hire only the 1% to maybe 5% who are competent enough to do it. And the rest of you, sorry, we have nothing for you. There is literally no solution for those people. As for the UK, he says, once one of the fastest growing populations in Europe, the latest figures show the deaths this year will now exceed births for the first time since the mid-1970s. Yeah, the last time things were fucked economically. What a coincidence. He says, yes, we on this island are part of the trend. We are also going to peak much earlier than previously expected by mid-century with a decline thereafter. Yes, folks, it's unexpected, he says, unimaginable and now undeniable. The pessimists are calling it the great global baby bust, and of course it's causing some politicians to go into spasm, he says. Now, again, if it was the same everywhere, well, okay, you would expect white birth rates to be declining more because of what I said earlier, that whites don't simply, for whatever reason, whites don't simply breed to the point of starve off. Whites actually slow down their breeding rate when they're at a saturation point. That's my theory anyway. That seems to be true. It's certainly more true of whites than of Africans. I think Asians do something similar, maybe not quite as much, not sure, but it's different either way. So you may expect white birth rates to decrease by more. What you would not then expect is for mass immigration of the third world into white countries. That is completely unjustifiable in any circumstance, but especially in light of the declining birth rates. If we're at saturation point, now is the absolute worst time to bring in foreigners. Shreya says, a few rare nations are doing great in Africa, and yes, a few are, and slowly catching up to Western standards. Botswana, which I've heard a lot, is doing better, though I haven't seen strong data on it, but I have heard so. For one, is hilarious because it's close to Zimbabwe, yeah. Less resources, third of the country is salt flats, and no easy port access, yet it's so far ahead of Zimbabwe, which has everything Botswana doesn't, because they went, let's copy some of Whitey's shit. Yeah. I think Botswana, I know this from Top Gear, don't they have a monarchy? I'll stick by what I've always said. I think democracy is a bit better than monarchy, but monarchy is not terrible, and it's more suitable for a less developed population. And I think also mixing the two is possibly better. So maybe that's working out. If someone there is interested in, I want to make this thing profitable, rather than just, let the politicians figure it out. Maybe that's the best balance for Africans, because they're not industrious or conscientious enough to do it themselves. They don't have the, as white Westerners do, most Westerners, but whites particularly, the inbuilt sense of doing the right thing. Now, some probably do, but nowhere near as many. So you can't really rely on that. Without that, by the way, without that sense, democracy is much less advisable, which is why mass immigration is a terrible idea for many other reasons as well. I did see a video recently on YouTube, which made an interesting point. Actually, I didn't know this. In ancient Greece, democracy was not done by popular vote, or by any other kind of vote. It was lottery, which I didn't know. I suppose I should have known that. But that's actually it's not a bad idea. There's some issues with it, but it's not a bad idea. The way it was done in Athens, anyway, was by lottery, and there are many good arguments for that. And it would reduce, because the main argument against voting is that you get instilled elite Because the kind of person that has the time and influence and money and whatever else to campaign for months to try to win popularity is exactly the kind of person that has connections to all the elite of the country and who is accepted to do so, because at any point during that they could be stopped by some made-up scandal or true scandal, or have their money stripped away for whatever reason. There's all kinds of ways to stop someone from succeeding during that process. So the elite kind of get to gatekeep. Now, I don't think that's the end of the world. There's arguments that that's okay as well, but there's definitely arguments against it. With the lottery system, it's not like that. You just pick at random, literally at random. Anyone could become someone with power and influence. Now, they had it wasn't a single leader. I think they did have a single leader, but they had a sort of a council and then a rabble of thousands that could come in and discuss. And the council were lottery picked, and they stayed in for a certain period of time, and they could make decisions. That system, it's not a bad idea, but this is Athens we're talking about, not a massive nation. This is Athens, a city of, I guess, hundreds of thousands, maybe a million or more, not that many, compared to, say, the US, 260 million, and much larger, or the UK, 60 million, or any other nation. Too large for a lottery system, really, because the kind of person that can devote themselves to politics, that can be in the place they need to be at the time they need to be there to do politics, is a kind of person that can't really have anything else to do. Of course, the state could subsidize it. It would get complicated, but you could do that. You could subsidize it. It wouldn't be for very many people, like jury duty. It would be like jury duty. So you could do that. It would be an impediment, and some people just wouldn't do it. There'd need to be a civil conscientiousness instilled in people for that to work. And I think you would still need expert advisors. I think this system would work really well for internal decisions about rights and about internal policy, that kind of thing. Of course, you would get issues where you sometimes would need expertise. So you'd need to have advisors, and they might end up running the show. But for external matters, I don't think it would be advisable, because in that case, you really do need to know what you're fucking doing. You need to know a bunch of secret stuff. You need to know what, you have a picture consistently of what's been happening internationally and what's happening now and where the plans are. Otherwise, you get a totally inconsistent set of plans. And of course, you could have the military advising lottery picked people, but then they all get to know all the secrets, and then they're not going to keep it to themselves. So I think a system like that with a lottery based system, or at least a hybrid lottery based system for internal decision making, with perhaps a monarch or maybe a voted in representative, but without much of a cabinet who don't make decisions, but they are there to represent the nation externally, and heavy involvement then also with the military, because I do think that and the military is only allowed to promote internally as well. I think the idea of going up through the military ranks gives a person a much greater connection with the requirements of reality. And so that would make them wiser for a lot of purposes, not necessarily for every political purpose, because sometimes you need to be idealistic and daring, which you wouldn't necessarily be. Daring with new social ideas and listening to like crazy avant-garde nonsense that needs to be tried. Sometimes you need that. So the military isn't good for all of that, but I think having them strongly involved with external politics at a very high level, at least during peacetime, it's probably a good idea. And then having a very small sort of colonel leader to be the external representative along with that. Perhaps a military leader, but I'm not sure about that. Maybe a better system. I think maybe some voting could be okay, but possibly quite limited, because voting is fairly easy for the elite to gatekeep. And honestly, the smaller the scale, the easier it is for them to gatekeep as well. So yeah, I think there's some advantages to it. There's some flaws with it, but it could work in a hybrid system, I think.